Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as let's see, how do I put this? This is part one of a two-part ranking of the interesting collectible checklist cards of 1994. Now, the thing is, I wanted to take the checklist cards from the year that were kind of collectible and mostly with players and cards on them, but the kinds of checklists you look at and go, that's really cool, and you want to kind of set them aside, maybe put them on display. I wanted to look at those and rank them. And I had 13 to 14 of them, which is way too much for one ranking, so I wanted to split them. The problem is, almost all of these I like, and so I didn't really feel that there was a best of and a worst of. I think that they're all kind of best of to an extent, so I'm going to be splitting them into two and talking about the ones that aren't as awesome and the ones that are really awesome as the two videos. And just the fact that there are so many that are really good gives a good idea of just how interesting 1994 was for checklists. And to that end, I wanted to show you, before I get into it, just a little bit of the array of checklists outside of these collectible checklists that give you kind of a feeling for different ideas. Because 1994 was a great year for checklists, which is a weird sentence to say, but it really, at the end of the day, was. And so, like at the bottom of the list, we have Score, Rookie and Traded. And in this case, okay, so Score did not do checklists for their sets. They did team checklists, which is something I'm going to be doing at a whole nother time. But for set checklists in 1994, they didn't bother to do any, except in Rookie and Traded, where team checklists did not make sense. So by looking at this card, you can tell it's probably good that they didn't do checklists in their other sets. Yeah, it's not good. Even the gold foil parallel doesn't help it at all. I think it actually kind of holds it back. Now, Score over at Select for football, they did a card where I don't think this was a success, but I give them full credit for trying. I like the concept of what they tried to do. I mean, I love the football print on the back, but on the front, this is a card where they wanted to play around with, it's kind of like they were playing around with Photoshop, and they tried something, and, you know, credit for trying it. Didn't come out well, but it's still an interesting checklist, pretty unique. Then you get kind of more toward the middle of the whole spectrum of checklists with Fleer for football, where these checklists, I have to acknowledge, I actually kind of like them. I don't love them at all to any extent, but I like them for what they do, which is these are checklists that are supposed to be just interesting enough that you know they're there, but not interesting enough to grab your attention. They're stuffed at the back of the set, and they don't ever grab your attention from the actual player cards. They're just kind of there, you know it, and you kind of move on. But there is something special about the checklist. That's what I think works for these cards. So they're a rousing success for what they're supposed to do and not for anything else. Whereas Topps did kind of the same thing with a much better designed card, in football, of course, where this design is kind of intricate. There's some things to look at. It's well crafted. It's also kind of a white noise card, but the problem here is this is a card that does not stand out, and so it kind of gets lost within the set, and that's the difference where I think Fleer is more successful, even though Topps has a card I'd rather look at. So both of these are kind of interesting ideas for, look, it's a checklist, let's do something with it. But really good checklists, well, now we move over to Skybox. The Skybox Impact checklist is a checklist that I think, I've always really admired this checklist. It's a very simple checklist, nice boxes, nice colors, fits so well into the card set. To me, I look at this and I go, that's exactly what a checklist for this particular set absolutely should look like. Is it what I would have come up with? No, it's not. But that's not the point. The point is that they did make a checklist that perfectly fit in and looks really nice. But Skybox Premium, now this is just a really nice and interesting checklist. It's basically a take on the Skybox Primetime Rookie card concept. And this is a more colorful version. It's also not as dynamic. But here's the interesting thing about this. You look at this checklist, even if it's the only checklist you ever saw, you look at it and you immediately know this is the only checklist that looks like this. No other card set did checklists like this. It's very distinct, and that's part of what I like about it, but I also like the cleanness of just how they added all that stuff into the background. It's really cool, and I think that for just a straight checklist, it's an absolute success. But it doesn't quite have that quality that makes it stand out to where it kind of has its own life and personality. And that's what I want to get into with the rankings, where I start off at the very end with the 1994 Select baseball checklist. Now, unlike football where it's kind of a mess, the baseball checklist is very straightforward. It's an image of a player. It's an image of a player. Now, they don't have different players. In each of the series, they only have one player. Different colors, which makes it kind of nice, but this is a checklist that's not supposed to be about the player, and frankly, do you even know who the player is? I don't. Instead, it's supposed to look like it's a checklist themed around baseball, and it's a wonderful success at that. And the fact that they have the different colored borders or the different colored backgrounds also does a good job of giving an interest to these checklists. None of them are really the kinds of checklists you want to collect, but it is the kind of checklist that stands out as a very distinct part of the set and is more of a positive to the set than anything else. So, good for that. Now, for Fleer in baseball, they did a card set where all of the checklists are individual players. So every card is different, and you can see exactly who these players are. Now, in this case, they wanted to really emphasize the checklist by really lightening everything else on the card, which kind of bleaches out the image and bleaches out the intensity of the card. It's a very anemic card. And that's the problem I have, is instead of being a soft, wispy kind of a card, it's a card that just seems kind of diluted. And there's nothing in the card that grabs my attention. That's the thing, is there's got to be something in the card that reaches out and says, hey, pay attention. And with these cards, nothing does. So they're really kind of boring, which is unfortunate. Now, Stadium Club did something more along the lines of what we saw in Select, where they do have an image that's repeated on different checklists. They also have different colors for each checklist. But these colors are really strong and powerful. The checklist itself is a little harder to read simply because everything's more tight on it. And so that means these checklists are stronger as an interesting card with a checklist as opposed to with Select where it's the other way around. But the thing I really like about the Stadium Club cards is, setting aside the brilliant color on these cards, which is very much a 1994 Stadium Club quality, I also like the parallels because, you obviously have the first day production, but you also have the gold rainbow holofoil parallel as well. And so these cards also have some tiers to them, which makes them, it's part of what makes these cards fun for me. So this is one that I enjoy because it's more fun. That's kind of the way to describe it. Now, the next card I have is Leaf for baseball. And with Leaf, this is just a super classy card, but it also is something very distinct in that it has a bunch of team logos. Now, you might notice that I have the 1993 Don Russ hockey checklist on here as well, which was the predecessor to the 94 Leaf. Both of these do the same thing, which is that they showcase all the logos, which I love. For me, I am a sports fan, specifically football and basketball. So even though I don't like baseball or hockey, whenever I see the logos, that's something that reaches into my heart as a fan and gets me excited. And when you showcase them the way that they're showcased on these cards, this is just like a cheat code to my heart. I love how this comes across. But I also love the really subdued classiness that these cards have. So this is a card that, to me, this is kind of a special card because of the logos. That's the thing that makes this distinct and above all the ones that we've looked at before. Then I move on to, well, this is kind of a cheat for me because this is the Upper Deck All-Time Heroes. Normally I don't cover specialty sets because in many cases, if not most of these cases, you'll never even know that any of these cards exist. And so I like to focus on the main sets when I do these rankings. But this is one I had to make an exception for because these checklists are fun, cool, retro checklists. Each one of them features a headshot of a legendary player in kind of a quirky 1960s type of an approach that Upper Deck, this is not the first time Upper Deck had done something like this, and I like the way that comes across, and I like the retro theme of the card, but also the fact that you get to collect legendary players in this set, which is an unusual opportunity. Obviously for this set it makes perfect sense, but it's something that makes it really distinct, and so you get that whole combination of a whole bunch of things coming together to make this an interesting card and a unique card. It's not as aesthetically pleasing as the previous two that we just saw, but it pulls its own weight in a different way. But the last three are all very, very, very similar, which is we start off with Fleer Ultra. And these are checklists where every single checklist is a different player. And basketball is the lowest tier of all of these because it's the only one that was designed differently. Specifically, it doesn't have the gold foil band at the bottom, and that's basically it. Other than that, it's done the same way, but for the basketball set, this is kind of a problematic set because the images for basketball are difficult as it is. Then when you bleach them out with the checklist, it makes it harder to really be able to see the images on the card. And then since you have a full bleed, either the image has to be strong or you have to have some element on the card to lock it in place. And that gold foil band at the bottom is what should do it. In this case, it doesn't do that, and that logo is kind of awkward. So these cards just don't come out in any way. I'm not a fan of them. For hockey, this is wildly better because hockey images can be just as busy, but you also have an easier time isolating hockey players, and they have really bright uniforms, so that allows for the images, if selected right, to be a lot stronger, which they are in these checklists. But that gold band down at the bottom really does help these cards out a lot. And I would actually rank these a little bit higher amongst the Ultra checklists, except for the fact that for Series 2, they didn't bother with it, and so they did a straightforward checklist, and so I'm going to ding them a little bit simply because we only got them for one series. Kind of a cheat, but I'm going to do that. Baseball, however, they did, for both of their series, they did have different players across all the checklists, and here the images have a lot of great dynamic quality to them that makes them all interesting, but they still read really well. And you can see who the player is. All of that is a wonderful combination that makes these cards work beautifully, but not at the level of football. Football is a lot easier because they have the bright colored jerseys like they have in hockey, but they also tend to have a lot of color in their backgrounds. And it's a lot easier to get a really tight, clear shot of the player, which makes these cards read a lot better and look a lot better. This is the high watermark for Ultra in 1994 for the checklists. Really like how they look. And I would almost put them a little bit higher up on the list because the next one I have, the second to the ultimate of these, is Game Day. And the big problem Game Day has is the same player shows up on all the checklists. There's not the variety that you see with Ultra. That would be a big ding for this set, but the fact is it's Game Day, and the shot that they have of the player is really big and really right up there, and it looks awesome because to me, I love just how much room the players are able to take up on these cards. It's almost like a mini poster, and yet it's still very narrow. That gives me the edge over Ultra. There's just something about Game Day that always gets to me. It's a weak spot for me, and I'm perfectly fine with that. But of this first section of checklist, the one that I consider to be the best is the Don Russ Triple Play cards. This is, like I said, the same as what we had before. They have different players on each checklist. Each player is stronger. His image is stronger on these cards. But the big thing is that band down at the bottom with the color fade is gorgeous. It's really awesome. So this is a card that does all the amazing stuff of the previous two sets, but it also has the fun, energetic playfulness at the bottom of the card that just stands out, and it's a ringing endorsement. It's interesting that the top three for this group are so similar, but there's just enough of a difference that that's how I have all of these ranked. I'd love to say there's a big jump up to the next group in terms of checklist, but there's not quite, because it's not that things are leveling out as much as there's kind of a middle area that these kind of fit into. And so when I do the next group for the part 2 in the next video, we're going to see more variety, and we're going to see a lot more care put into some of the checklists, and they can look really amazing. These are really cool. I like them, and it gives you an idea of something that's hardly ever talked about, which is checklists. There are a lot of really good ones in 1994, and it's great when you are able to take the opportunity to sit down and fully appreciate them, as I've done here. So let me know in the comments below whether you think this is a good idea or not. I'm kind of curious about that. And if there's a checklist that you're aware of in 1994 that doesn't have a player on it that you think should have been on this list, I'm curious to hear what basic checklists really did warrant showing up here on this list. So yeah, curious to hear what you have to say. Look out for the part 2 coming up next week. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Thank you very much for watching.